Last but not least, from startup to upstart, growing your company for tomorrow's industry. We've heard about the next gen, we've heard about new technology. Now we're going to talk to two companies, one that works with companies to help them grow, our own aerospace incubator right here, Starburst Accelerator, right here in Los Angeles, and also one of the firms that have benefited from their assistance, Relativity Space. At this time, would you please welcome David Tearse and Tim Ellis.
Hi everyone, I'm David Tearse. I'm a tech and industry analyst at Starburst Accelerator. I graduated here from USC with an aerospace engineering degree. Now my primary role as a tech and industry analyst at Starburst is basically vetting new startups, searching for new startups, searching for the next hot one that will be of interest to our corporates, and trying to help facilitate that matchmaking between our corporates and our startups. So I'd like to kind of start off with this quote by Steve Case at South by Southwest last year. He kind of encompasses and tells a lot about how the next wave is this interaction between startups and the large corporate companies. Startups have great new ideas, they're able to move quickly, while these corporates have a lot of credibility, a lot of money, and really the key to their success of both of them will be the interaction between the two of them. So we at Starburst focus on three different parts of aerospace: space mobility, regional mobility, and urban mobility, and all of the enabling technologies within that. We kind of break that up into about 20 or so different verticals. And if you everything from launchers to in-flight entertainment, IoT devices, cybersecurity, additive manufacturing, and factory of the future. Within those, we've seen about one become about a $10 billion business. We've seen another 2 unicorns, and we've seen 10 or so with valuations over 100 million. As you can see, many of them being within space, but we're seeing a big uptick within the additive manufacturing, industrial side of this business as well, kind of fusing the two together, such as Tim here at Relativity is doing. So a little quick timeline about Starburst. We were founded in 2012 by Francois Chopard in Paris, actually, originally. We launched the Accelerator in 2013. We then opened up shop here in El Segundo in 2015. We had about 200 or so startups within our database. Last year, we opened up our Munich and Singapore offices, and we really made a big push to increase our database, so we got up to about 1,500 or so. And this last year, we opened our Montreal office, got up to 2,500 startups, and we now have plans for opening our Tel Aviv office here this next year. Of those, we've had 187 pitch worldwide at our big events with all of our corporate partners, 87 of which have received venture-backed funding, totaling north of now $540 million. And I would like to really point out one number on here is that 393 million of that has happened within the United States. And more specifically, a good chunk of that has happened within California, averaging about $10 million per round. So as you can see, the US and California specifically is the best place in the world really for aerospace and for these processes and startups to be facilitated within. So this is just a clipping from an article of saying that the next billion-dollar company will be within aerospace. Now more than ever is a great time to have a startup within this industry, and the partnerships are only growing between startups and these large corporate companies. So we like to kind of end with this, kind of showing what we try to do at Starburst. We try to level the playing field. We help introduce our startup companies and promote the interactions between the startups and our large corporate partners. And that's all I have, so thanks.
So at Relativity, our story actually starts here at USC. I'm a proud Trojan alumni, fight on. So went here back in 2012 with my co-founder Jordan, where we ran the rocket propulsion lab. So we're trying to be the first student group in the world to launch a rocket to space of our own design. And then I went off, used that experience, went to Blue Origin, where I was there for 3 years developing BE4, which is their 550,000-pound thrust LOX methane engine. And then from that experience, ended up starting the metal 3D printing group at Blue Origin. My co-founder was at Spacex at the time working on Super Draco, which is their printed engine. And we really saw an opportunity to start our own company, Relativity, and change the way rockets are manufactured. So really the big future that we see is a day when rockets are actually built and flown in days instead of years. So right now, iteration time in aerospace we see as the biggest barrier to actually seeing a much faster future with much cheaper rockets, very common space flight. And so with that, Relativity was founded to 3D print an entire rocket. So we are actually building what is the largest metal 3D printer in the world, and have actually tested fully 3D printed engines as well over the last year. And with that, so our long-term goal is printing the first rocket made on Mars, which sounds like a very ambitious, like kind of crazy thing to go do. But Elon has really, been a big inspiration that he's going to send people with SpaceX. But at Relativity, we want to create the technology that can actually scale out a civilization on another planet. And it turns out that core technology of automation and 3D printing is what you need to make rockets cheap on Earth as well. So we have kind of a dual-use business case in that sense. So we've raised over $10 million to date, really over the last 18 months. So it started out actually with Mark Cuban. We just kind of cold emailed him and got our first funding from Cuban. Didn't go on Shark Tank, but really he saw the excitement of aerospace and kind of the movement that was building, and then went through a startup accelerator called Y Combinator. Have known Starburst for a long time as well, and then raised Series A last year. So with that, we were actually still just 2 people when we did all our funding. So we were kind of like, very excited co-founders, had all this capital now to go build out our vision. But we really just pretty much had a blank warehouse back in July of 2016. So then really 12 months later, we built what is the largest metal 3D printer in the world. So it can make 10-foot diameter, 20 feet tall sections of the rocket. We're developing our own custom aluminum alloys as well, which is part of what makes this technology work. And you can actually see there's a person in there for scale, so it is really, really big. And then we've also built our own engines, so we're testing down at NASA Stennis Space Center as well. This is a 20,000-pound thrust LOX methane engine, all fully 3D printed and designed in-house. We've done about 70 tests to date. And then, like I mentioned, we're at NASA Stennis, so this has really helped us get into testing much faster. The infrastructure for developing and building rockets is very, very kind of weighty for a startup. So if you want to go fast, public-private partnerships are really important to do that. And then we're also developing our own launch vehicle with this technology. So we're flying 900 kilograms to sun-synchronous orbit. So it's actually on the much larger side of the small satellite launch space. And for $10 million, it makes it actually the lowest cost launch vehicle other than Falcon 9. It's similar to PSLV or Soyuz over in Russia. And then we've made our own printer as well. So this was all developed in-house, like with the goal of fully 3D printing a rocket. So looking to expand in the LA area in 2018 with just more manufacturing space, and that kind of gets to the questions. So that's us.
So I know a lot of you are probably interested in more of what Tim's been working on, so I have some questions here for him. And kind of based on the mixed crowd here, I just tried to keep it as general as possible. So what would you say are some of the reasons why right now is a great time to start your startup in the aerospace field?
Yeah, so I think that has 2 answers. Like the short one for us is that coming from like Blue and SpaceX, it was very clear that now was the opportunity to really think of an entire product to be additively manufactured. I mean, we really view 3D printing as actually just software-defined manufacturing. So it's more a future where all of the parts of a supply chain are in software and can be controlled with enterprise tools and quality control, things like data collection during the printing process. Linking all that together is really possible the more and more it's defined by software. So that was kind of the big, I think, breakthrough that wanted us to start now.
Okay. And what would you say you've seen like the additive and robotic industry change over the last year, and where do you see this going next? If you have any predictions, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, no question, like, I think this panel and this day's evidence of that additive manufacturing is this, like, huge kind of growth movement. I think what really needs to happen for it to take off is for companies to think about it as this very holistic, entire product from a blank sheet of paper, which for us is really just, like, thrusting yourself kind of bravely, we're either going to succeed or not based on our ability to figure this out. So this is not like a hobby or side project. You straight up are depending on your entire company on this technology. So that's kind of one. And then robotics, I think there's a huge, I don't know where it's going necessarily as much as the opportunity, I think, is in robotics software. So OpenAI has been doing a lot on kind of visual systems for grabbing robotics with just normal 6-axis arms. And their biggest breakthrough recently is that they're able to actually machine learn grabbing different size objects and doing all of that learning in simulation. So they're not even physically grabbing things anymore to train the algorithms. They're actually doing it fully in simulation, which makes it much, much faster.
OK. In what ways do you think government organizations or other policy changes could help the startup community here in Southern California?
Yeah, that's a good one. So for us specifically, getting into a new space, like a physical space, is really, really challenging being a startup, because even if you've raised a large amount of money, you don't really have a credit history. And by definition, you really have 18 to 24-month runway at all points, just because you're trying to put that money into growth. And so finding a landlord or a space, is something that we've definitely struggled with, because there's a big catch-22. So I'm not exactly sure what specific stuff could help with that, but that's definitely a huge problem that I see. Yeah.
And I don't know what your team is made up of. Are they a lot of USC alum and stuff like that? But do you see this value in the pipeline of talented engineers here, and is that maybe why you decided to locate here versus, let's say, a San Francisco or Seattle, or closer maybe to one of the test centers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no question we're here because of talent. That's really where we're recruiting. There's a huge talent pool. It's just a larger number of people to choose from. We are pulling software people down from San Francisco. I would say there's a bigger software pool there. Certainly fundraising capital is more available there. But I am seeing LA improve quite a bit in that regard, especially as San Francisco is just getting more and more expensive. Even Seattle, when we first started, we were actually based in Seattle, because I just was at Blue. And it just went into the nearest WeWork, basically. And now Seattle's more expensive than LA in a lot of the metrics. So I think LA is actually very attractive. Plus it has this really good energy that I think draws the kind of person that wants adventure, wants to kind of be very innovative, and I like that.
And kind of my final question was, what would you say? I know you were part of Rocket Lab here. What can universities do to help prepare students to go into the startup world and, I guess, additive manufacturing or the aerospace field? What did you maybe do, and what would you say could be improved?
Yeah, so other than reputation, going to USC, I would absolutely credit being part of the Rocket Lab as the reason I got into Blue Origin originally. There's a whole bunch of people that are going to Virgin, SpaceX, Boeing, all these kind of great JPL, all these great LA-based companies. And I think the hands-on experience and really just supporting student groups like Rocket Lab, really with just more money. The funding they had was very, very low relative to the output of what they were actually doing. And I think just nothing replaces the hands-on experience of actually making something, kind of from a blank sheet of paper to flight yourself. Because then you also get to see, what are the barriers, what are the opportunities to make this go faster. Actually metal 3D printing has gone and started a lot in universities just for this very reason. It's cheaper, it's faster, it takes less people to actually make a product. And so you've actually seen a lot of universities doing metal printing. I think just USC could keep supporting that specifically. Okay,
cool. Well, let's go to some of these questions. Let's see, the one we got here is, what do you use for subject line on a cold email to Mark Cuban to get his attention?
Yeah, that's a good one. So the subject line was, "Space is sexy, 3D printing an entire rocket." He replied within 5 minutes and literally said, "I'll do your entire seed round." But then it took 2 months of diligence, which is just kind of answering technical questions with this team. But yeah, I was kind of surprised too. It was cool.
So I guess our second one is, what is the cost-saving factor of Relativity engines compared to the SLS system or against a SpaceX engine?
Yeah, so in that one, I mean, there's really no direct comparison. I mean, our engines are 20,000 pound thrust. It's much, much smaller than a Merlin at SpaceX or Raptor or the SLS engines. But the entire system is about a third of the price compared to our competition, kind of in the small satellite launch space is what we're going after.
Did you use a 3D printer to print your 3D printer?
We do have metal 3D printed parts on the 3D printer. Yes, we do. Yeah.
And if the small sat demand grows significantly, how do small sat launch vehicles expect to compete with the significant cost per kilogram advantage that larger launch vehicles have?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so just kind of background. Larger launch vehicles always are cheaper just due to physics for the most part. I mean, economies of scale make it that way. But we believe with the technology we're building specifically that it actually lowers the cost because you can do more flights or build a larger vehicle with fewer people ultimately. But that has kind of downstream effects of making the whole industry much larger, increasing launch frequency, and I think ultimately we'd have just a larger space industry by supporting these new technologies.
Let's see, how is Starburst funded? Do you take a stake in your incubatees? So we actually, for the most part, we are funded through our corporate partners. So our corporate partners will pay us kind of an annual retainer, a membership per se, and that gets them access to our events. It gets them anywhere from 1 to 4 private pitches per year. That's where we would bring in startups under a certain topic, and they would come and pitch privately to them. With our startups, we run on a commission basis. So if we do an introduction at one of our events, a contract comes out of it, we take a small percentage of that. We do not take equity in any of our startups, but we do have, so I work on the Accelerator side. We have 2 other sides to our company. One is our consulting side, which pretty self-explanatory, consults with engineering, large corporations, and with startups, basically on how to price their product, how to do fundraising and all that stuff. But then we also have a venture side. We actually just announced our first investment in Nautilus, which is a amphibious cargo drone. So it lands on water versus on your runways. So that is our first one. We will be now using that as our way of the startups that come through our accelerator that we're really excited about. We would be potential investors in them as well. What would you recommend to do as an engineer to learn enough about the business to become an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. So really, when I started Relativity, I knew nothing about business. We did go through Y Combinator, which is a startup accelerator, in some ways similar to Starburst, and that really helped. But I would say the biggest thing I did is you just have to be a very voracious reader. I ended up just constantly reading about equity. How does that work? How does venture funding work? How does angel investing work? How do you do interviews? How do you hire? How do you build a team from scratch? Like, just kind of read like an insane amount, and don't be afraid to ask people. I mean, there's a lot of people that have built companies before, and I haven't really just like emailing Mark Cuban, haven't really found that people aren't willing to share their advice, because once you've been successful, I think there's a lot of pleasure in helping other people out. So.
Yeah, and I can kind of speak to that a little bit too, is like you said, there's Y Combinator, there's plenty of incubators out there. We typically have companies that are a little bit later stage, but there's tons of incubators out there that you just have to explore, and they have mentors at them. They can help you really shape your business model and nail down all those little things that an investor is going to pick apart if you don't have it right the first time. Have you seen a predominant theme is in the type of startups within the aerospace industry? Since we cover everything, it's kind of hard to say, but I would say there's a lot of push right now for electrification of aircraft. We have a lot of startups that are doing that. There's a lot of venture capital money that's being excited about that. Space, as you could see from the investment slide that I had up there, space, everyone loves launchers, everyone loves satellites, Earth observation satellites. Those are 2 of the really big things. And then additive manufacturing is definitely one, and with that is the powders. One of our most successful startups is literally just a metal powder company because they have a unique blend and that everyone wants. So they're selling it like crazy by they're selling tons of it to all of the big aerospace companies, and that's all they do. They don't touch it once it gets to the company, and that's all they really want to do. So I think I see that as a big theme, and I'm sure that you guys are constantly looking at new powders to be using and stuff of that sort.
Yeah.
Do you expect to see space mining in the next 10 years?
I actually think Mars, like landing on Mars and starting the colony, is probably more likely than space mining. And that's just, so the kind of companies that are going after space mining look to be making good progress, but I just think a lot of this activity is going to have some government involvement as far as, wanting to help go do a really big, ambitious mission. And I think going to Mars or even going to the moon, frankly, is likely to draw a lot more NASA kind of funding, and that helps kind of catalyze things.
So let's see here. How's your additive philosophy different from what SpaceX, Blue Origin, et cetera, are doing?
Yeah, good question. I mean, the biggest thing we're doing differently is that our entire product is based on additive from the very beginning, and we've built our own 3D printer. So I think, if you look at those companies, they're doing, a very, very inspiring job on reusable rockets. Obviously, huge respect for everything they're doing. But for us, additive isn't really a side project or something that we're doing to see if it pans out. Our company will pan out if additive does or does not. And so I think that really forces us to make a lot of breakthroughs in additive in the entire supply chain of software-defined manufacturing.
What kind of startups am I seeing with UAVs? So there's a lot of UAV companies out there. We have, I think, over 200 or 300 in our US deck alone. I would say that the ones that are gaining the most attention are ones that can fly indoors, have different types of vision systems versus your typical like off-the-shelf commercial ones that are using radar using radio signals or GPS signals. Those inherently, when they're indoors, they freak out and they don't like it. So we see a lot of ones that are redefining kind of the coordinate system within these drones so that they're just stable naturally. Ones that can go inside caves, that can go inside bunkers, that can go underneath cars, things of that sort. So I'd say a lot of it is going into the software side of it versus the actual drone itself. And then drone itself is just getting smaller, more efficient, quieter, and better battery life on them. With an engineering background and as a startup, how did you develop strategy and direction for the future?
Yeah, good question. So how we even came up with what to work on was honestly just looking, 50 years in the future. It was something so dominated by physics, with rocket launch, and then being able to fairly easily model the economics of making things faster with fewer people. It was clear that it was inevitable at some point, 50 years in the future, that rockets or an aerospace product would be entirely 3D printed. And so then just working backwards, like 20 years in the future, 10 years, 5, like we kind of just thought ahead that if we started today, that it would actually be possible in a time frame that was venture backable. So it was really just like what's inevitable, and then kind of working back from that. Yeah, that's how we came up with what to do.
What do you think is driving the demand for these small sat launches?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we're actually going after, we'll fly CubeSats, kind of these very small satellites, but we're actually going after more like mini fridge or refrigerator-sized satellites. I think we had a picture of a Fiat 500 in the payload fairing for scale. And so really what's driving the demand for those constellations of satellites are that LEO or low Earth orbit constellations have very low latency. So you're able to communicate with the Earth very, very fast compared to geosynchronous satellites, which are the traditional school bus-sized, very, very far away from Earth. And really, ultimately, those two are kind of going to mesh together in a network. But it's really just more data connectivity. New countries coming online. There's still a lot of people that aren't connected by internet. So that's really the biggest demand.
And I would say, at least from what we've seen, is that the government's driving that a lot too. With SAR technology coming out right now, and there's a handful of companies out there that have raised huge amounts of money working on this. It's how fast can we see different types of movement in different parts of the world, and how quickly can we get a refresh rate on these images, these Earth observation images. So I've heard that the federal government is expecting to move towards supersonic flight. Are you seeing any startups in this technology? Yes, I mean, Boom was part of our program back in the day. We have about 3 or 4 others that are working on it as well. It's a long process to fully design a supersonic jet. So we see a lot of companies working on different aspects of it, whether it's the engine. One of the big things it's going to be is the skin of it and how to keep it cool. I know that people say when you're on the Concorde, if you touch the window, it was very, very hot. So I think that a lot of it is going to be due with the new materials that will be used on the outside and ways to reduce the sonic boom. Because as of right now, even Boom, they're saying all their routes on their website are over the ocean. Because right now you can't fly it over land because it's just too loud. So I think for them to take over a market, like a high market share, they're going to have to figure out that problem. And we have some startups working on that, but that is also a far off problem as well. So Relativity, what are you looking for in a candidate for your 2018 summer internship position, and that company is recruiting for?
Yes, we are looking for interns for next summer. I guess high level, really hands-on experience. Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to have some demonstrated ability, previously, to take a project, even if it's a school project, from a blank sheet of paper to something that works. Yeah, and it's on the website too. I'm assuming they looked at our website to find that. Yeah, happy to chat after too. You can come find me.
And then I guess, what has been your approach to assembling your team?
Yeah, so assembling the team, I mean, it's really the same thing. I mean, you look for, people that, well, one, we were in stealth mode for a long time until really just 3 weeks ago. We had a launch with a website on Bloomberg, which has been helpful. But so before that, it was really kind of like network effects. I think people just heard about what Jordan and I were working on and reached out to us. And yeah, I mean, we've assembled a very, very high quality team, I believe, and super proud of them.
Do you foresee incorporating supply chain within your company model?
I mean, we're going to have supply chain, so we're not 3D printing avionics, for example, or harnesses. Those are big, challenging areas in and of themselves. So, I think there's other parts, probably some of the valves, some other things initially that we would be looking for, and of course, building things like test stands and that kind of a thing. It still takes pretty serious hardware, and we're not 3D printing our test stand.
Okay. And how do we better prepare our engineers to design for manufacturability?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, no question, design for additive is very, very different than design for normal manufacturing. I think it kind of goes through swings as well, where people, want to print the same thing that you just machined. Then they want to design crazy, crazy things that actually can't be printed. And so there is a lot of learning, and I think really just going through that is important. I mean, I could easily see this being taught in school. I mean, I think it actually is a fairly straightforward process to go through. And then apart from school, I mean, I haven't really looked on things like Coursera or other kind of education programs, but I think there is a big opportunity, and that actually education about 3D printing is one of the biggest barriers to a bigger adoption. Because you get in these cycles where, I mean, I even had this at Blue Origin. You're pitching to management to bring 3D printing into the company, but then you do test cases or test pieces, and if the engineering doesn't really quite get how it works initially, and it takes some time to figure out, that's a really big barrier just to adoption.
All right, well, I think that was our last question because we covered that one. So, perfect.
Yeah, cool.
Well, thank you.
All right, thanks.
Thank you both. I want to say before you guys leave the stage, are we looking at the next Elon Musk here? Did we just hear?
Don't say that.
No, This is what this whole day was all about. It's about the future of aerospace and defense manufacturing. And I think that we just closed it off with the epitome of exactly what we're looking to support as a region, and what can we do to help them and their supply chain? What can we help them as far as the knowledge base that we have here? And what can we do in terms of both our universities and putting out students who can be even more excited entrepreneurs like this individual, and to have groups that support them, such as Starburst Incubator. So we thank all of you for coming. I want to once again thank all of our sponsors. We have March JPA, we have CalEd, we have CETA, City of Paris, County of Riverside, Elsevier. Who am I missing here? I'm missing Lewis Group of Companies, who's sponsoring the food and the reception. And last but not least, I have County of Riverside, March JPA. I have, CSUN. I didn't say CSUN? How did I miss CSUN? And I just talked about how wonderful state schools are, because you know I love my state schools, although I work at USC. Fight on. With that, I want to say thank you all for attending. Please, 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 when you get the email from us that says, give us your feedback on our survey, please fill it out. Give us your feedback. Let us know what we can improve, what you'd like to see in the future. And also sign up for our newsletter. Look for the videos as well as the PowerPoints to be up on our website within the next couple of weeks. And last but not least, we hope to see you at our future events. Thank you so much for joining us.